Okay, we'll begin. Are there questions? Okay, so if not, let me first begin by reviewing what we are discussing at the end of last lecture, because I think there is some confusion. So let me remind you of this plot. On the y-axis, we plotted this quantity lambda inverse H inverse. On the x-axis is time. And it had a shape like this. It fell exponentially during inflation, and then it increased during radiation and matter dominated era. Okay, with some change in slope as you go from radiation to matter dominated. So the physical interpretation of this, as we discussed, is that this is the distance scale, the co-moving scale, co-moving distance scale. That light can travel in time H inverse. And the physical significance of this, we said, is that this is the distance scale over which microscopic physics can affect fluctuations. But if the distance is larger than this, then the microscopic, then light cannot travel from one region to another. So there is microscopic physics will not be able to affect the even any fluctuation over that kind of scale. Then we drew this last scattering time, TLS, and the corresponding value of lambda inverse H inverse from this graph is what we call R naught. So this R naught is what subtends 2-degree angle on the surface of last scattering. So now the point is the following. Let's consider a scale R1. Okay, suppose you are looking at fluctuations over scale R1. Then if you draw this horizontal line and define this as, say, T1 prime and this time as T1. So these are names. So this is called the time at which the perturbation exits the horizon. And this corresponds to re-entry. So exit and entry refers to whether that scale becomes larger than this lambda inverse H inverse or not. So the point here is that in this period, whatever happens microscopically, okay, cannot affect fluctuations over this scale. Okay. But in this period, okay, microscopic physics can affect fluctuations over this scale, and also in this period, microscopic physics can affect fluctuations over this scale. Okay. So if we look at the fluctuation over this scale, okay, at the time of last scattering, because that's what CMB tells us. Okay. From then on, of course, you can use the microscopic physics to evolve it forward in time. Okay. And that's how structures form and so on, right? That part can be done explicitly by computers and numerical analysis. But what we see in the CMB spectrum is this, okay, the image of the universe at this time. So what we see is that fluctuations at scale R1, okay, which is less than R0, okay, that means this corresponds to angle that is less than 2 degrees. Okay. Fluctuations over that scale can get affected, of course, during inflation, but it can also get affected between the time T1 and TLS. Okay. So this is so observation here will be sensitive not only to just the inflationary part, but also what happened in this part, okay, how the microscopic physics evolved in this part. In contrast, if you consider a distance R2, okay, that is larger than R0, Okay, and then similarly draw this horizontal line. Okay. So you can of course extrapolate it. Okay, at some point it will cut this. But the important point here is that here you can see that the exit happens earlier. Okay, so call this T2 prime. So this is the exit that happens earlier, but the re-entry happens later. So this is T2. Okay. So at the time of last scattering, okay, this scale has not re-entered the horizon. Okay, that means it has not gone below this curve, okay. And which means that the in whole of this period, fluctuations over this scale cannot be affected by microscopic physics. Okay, and this we'll try to make more clear as we do some explicit calculations, and we'll see what exactly one means by the fluctuations not being affected by microscopic physics. But roughly, it is this feature that because light cannot travel over this distance scale, okay, in this part of the in this interval, okay, that's why microscopic physics shouldn't be able to affect fluctuations over this larger scale. So that means that if you look at the last scattering, the CMB data, okay, and look at fluctuations over this scale, R2, which corresponds to looking at fluctuations where you average over larger angles, okay, then that part is sensitive directly to what happened during inflation and not anything what happened afterwards. Okay, except of course the general details like the expansion of the universe and so on. And we will see how to take those into account. But the microscopic physics is not going to affect this part of the evolution. And so you get a direct image of what happened during inflation. So this is essentially where you stop. So are there questions on this?
Sir, why are we only worried about microscopic physics affecting fluctuations at only during one epoch? I mean, during the order of time scale of H inverse?
Yeah, actually, it doesn't really matter very much because you can say, why not add them up, right? That may exceed. But during matter and radiation dominated era, that in fact doesn't happen, right? Because this is also the roughly the size of the horizon at a given time. Okay, if you include the if you exclude the increase in the size of the horizon during the inflation, then this is really also the size of the horizon. Okay. So essentially the point is that because the expansion of the universe is slowing down, okay, the most of the contribution to the horizon comes from the last epoch. So that's why you don't worry about, so you're worried about why not add them up, right? And that could exceed, but that doesn't really happen because the horizon size here, for example, okay, basically comes from lambda inverse H inverse in this region. Is that point clear?
Yeah.
So this is what I said that this is the distance light can travel in time H inverse. Now this is also a distance light can travel all the way from the end of inflation to at a given time. Okay, it may change it by numerical factor, but it's roughly the same order. Any other question? So then the question at this stage is what produces these fluctuations during inflation? Okay. Particularly fluctuations at this scale have to be produced during inflation. Okay, so you can ask what is responsible for this. And this is a relevant question because we had seen that inflation basically erases all fluctuations that were present earlier. Okay, because it smoothens out. Okay. So classically, the inflation will have at the end of inflation, we'll have very little fluctuation, right? Whatever was there earlier, okay, have gotten diluted by this factor of e to the minus 60. So then this is a question, and what we'll see is that the answer is that this is the fluctuations of quantum fields, quantum fluctuations of fields at the time of inflation. Now, normally you would have thought that the quantum fluctuations are tiny, right? In fact, quantum fluctuations are much smaller typically than 1 in 10 to the 5, okay, in the context of classical physics. Okay. So they shouldn't be enough to produce fluctuations of the kind that we see. But what we'll see, in fact, is that in the de Sitter universe, right, which is this expanding universe, okay, there's an enhancement factor for the quantum fluctuations, and that's what makes it reasonable to assume that it's the quantum fluctuations that are responsible for what we see today. Okay. Because these are, in fact, the only sources, right? If the quantum fluctuations couldn't do it, then there'll be no other source of fluctuations over that scale. Okay, so the universe should have, the CMB should have been uniform over that scale. So let me start with some general definition, okay, but maybe I'll first say a few words about the units. So far we have used H bar and C equal to 1. And we have mostly kept G, mostly displayed G explicitly. Right? Maybe a few times we had set it equal to 1, but not always. Okay. So from now on, we are going to adopt a somewhat different convention. And that's to set G equal to not 1, but 1 over 8 pi. Okay. So these are called what are called reduced Planck unit. Okay. And the reason for doing that is because in quantum theory, often these factors of 8 pi arise, and it's simpler. The formula looks simpler if we just set the G equal to 1 over 8 pi, or 8 pi G equal to 1. Okay. So in these units, for example, that we can work out the relation between the reduced units and the original units. So reduced Planck mass. Okay, I think this is 1 over square root of 8 pi times the Planck mass. Okay, this we can easily work out. Okay. Then reduced Planck length becomes square root of 8 pi times Planck length. And then reduced Planck time is the same. Okay, so in this various formulae, we will be using this unit. Okay, not today very much, but when we actually do quantized gravitons in this background, then this is a very useful thing to do. Okay, so now let me start with some definitions. So suppose chi I of xt for I equal to 1, 2, etc. are some local operators. So these could be fundamental fields, okay, like phi xt, right, fundamental field, or the metric. Okay, typically I'll take the difference between the metric and the background metric, but we'll discuss this later. Okay. But it could also be composite operators like T mu nu. Okay, at this stage, let's not worry about what chi I is, but let's say that you have a set of objects in which you are interested in. Then we'll define chi I bar as the expectation value of chi I. And here, because the background is space translation invariant, but not time translation invariant, we expect that this expectation value will be proportional to will be time will be dependent on time, but not on space. So here this different corresponds to quantum average. Okay, and I'll elaborate on this a little later. Okay. So this is the average in the quantum state of the universe. So given this chi I bar, we define the fluctuations. Okay, that's the deviation away from this average value as a difference. Chi I tilde as difference between chi I xt minus chi I bar xt. And then the quantity of interest, which is the fluctuation, will be the two-point function chi I tilde xt chi j tilde yt. We are using equal time. Okay, and this is the simplest one. You can also consider different times. Okay, but mostly what we see in the micro background is this equal time two-point function, because we basically look at the sky at one slice of time, right? One time slice, because that's the time of last scattering. So this is what we'll be interested in. Okay, and again, this corresponds to quantum average. Now, this quantum average is a little strange for this, because we are talking about this. This is the average in the expectation value in the quantum state of the universe. Okay. And normally, when you talk in terms of expectation value, okay, have in mind that if you repeat the experiment many times and take the average, then that the expectation value gives you that result. But of course, there is only one universe. So, I mean, even if we can define it in principle, okay, by imagining that we just take multiple copies of the universe, okay, in the same quantum state, and then calculate, make this measurement. Okay. In actual practice, of course, you can only make a measurement on the universe that you have. Okay. So, when you try to make connection between this and what we see in experiment, okay, this average that we considered here, okay, in actual experiment, we average over space, okay, which in this case means the following, okay, that this, because again we can take the whatever state of the universe to be transition invariant, because the background metric is transition invariant. Okay. We expect this to be some function Fij of x minus y and t. So when we actually make a measurement, okay, and we'll see later how to connect this to what we measured. Okay. The average that you do is that you keep this x minus y fixed, okay, at some value z, and then average over y. Okay, because I mean, while you cannot do our experiment on many universes, okay, we can certainly look at different directions in the sky and calculate this object Fij x minus y, okay, but with y varying in space. Is this point clear? Okay. So CMB, for example, when you talk about average, you will take this product of the appropriate quantities at 2 points in space, okay, and then you keep this x minus y fixed, okay, and calculate the average over different choices of y. Okay, that's what we practically mean by this average when you make connection with the experiment. Okay, so let me now introduce a few more notations, okay, because we will be working mostly with the Fourier transform. So we define Fourier transform. So chi hat I xt will be integral dq, sorry, it's kt and the inverse Fourier transform is okay. Note that we have to take taking the Fourier transform only in space and not in time. So if we calculate this, okay, chi hat I kt chi hat j k prime t. Okay, just use this definition. Okay, so this gives you integral d cube x d cube y e to the minus I k dot x minus I k prime dot y. And then these two-point function that we have already called fij of x minus y and t. And then what you do is that you define this to be z. Define x minus y equal to z. Okay, and write this integral in terms of x and z maybe. Okay, so this becomes integral. So basically we substitute x equal to y plus z. So you get integral d cube y d cube z e to the minus I y dot k plus k prime and minus I k dot z if so the y integral just gives you a factor of 2 pi cube delta cube k plus k prime, and this we have a Fourier transform. So this is a function of z, x minus y is z. So let me, I can write it as z. So this Fourier transform I can call f hat ij of t. Okay, and everything is a function of time. Okay. So we want to calculate these objects. Okay, because later on we'll see that these are the objects that we can make, we can relate to experiments with cosmic microwave background. So now let me just point out one thing, which is that since k is the conjugate variable, so k is the conjugate variable to x. Okay. Maybe I should have said what is x, okay, because I used this transition invariance. So let me do this. So remember the FRW metric ds squared as minus dt squared plus lambda t squared. Here you have dr squared plus r squared d omega squared. So here I'm just using Cartesian coordinate and writing this as dx squared, which is dx1 squared plus dx2 squared plus dx3 squared. Okay, so that's what we call x. So then this x variable, so that's the variable we are using to do all this Fourier transform and so on. And this x variable, we can see that there is translation invariance, just x goes to x plus a. And that's why the Fij is independent of x. It's independent of the origin. Okay, that's the translation invariance. Okay, so now let me come back. Okay, so this also shows that because lambda of t is chosen to be 1 at t naught, right? That's today. The co-moving distance is basically the distance measured in x. Okay, that's the definition of the co-moving distance. So co-moving distance is the distance measured in x. So small k, okay, so k is variable conjugate to x. Okay, so k is the conjugate variable to x. Okay. So small k means large distance. Yeah, in Fourier transform space, small k basically means that wavelength is like 1 over mod k, so that's large. And similarly, large k means small distance. Okay. So then our previous argument, okay, the argument that we reviewed at the beginning, would seem to say that the fluctuations at scale mod k inverse at mod k inverse should not be affected when mod k inverse is larger than lambda inverse H inverse. Right? Earlier you are thinking of a distance, but now we are translating it to the momentum space statement. Okay? Namely that the fluctuations, okay, that namely that this f at ij that we defined, f at ij of kt, okay, for k that is larger than this, okay, should not be affected by microscopic physics. Okay, as long as this condition holds. When this condition stops holding, okay, this of course is time dependent, okay, because this right hand side is time dependent. So when this condition stops holding, then the microscopic physics starts affecting the fluctuations over this scale. Okay. So this is something we'll see in explicit calculations, and that will also make clear by as to in which sense microscopic physics doesn't affect this the perturbations over this scale. Are there questions? Okay, so we'll start doing this calculation, okay, of fluctuations in de Sitter space in the toy example. Okay, but the toy example will be useful because the results can be then lifted to more complicated cases.
So why did you say that Fij is the quantity of interest?
We'll see later, because this is what we'll be able to directly relate for appropriate choice of this chi-i's. Okay. This Fij is what will directly relate to CMB spec, what you see in the CMB fluctuation. Okay. So it will be a long process, but we'll eventually relate these to what you observe.
Okay.
So right now it is not clear why this is of interest. Okay, but later on we'll see that this is what gives rise to fluctuations. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll be considering massless scalar field. in de Sitter, and we'll take the potential to be constant. Okay, during inflation, of course, potential is almost constant, but it rolls. Okay, but right now let's just take this to be constant. So this means that we have exactly constant Hubble constant. Okay, the lambda dot over lambda square is 8 pi g over 3 times v naught. 8 pi g I've set equal to 1, so this is v naught over 3. So h, which is lambda dot over lambda, is really constant, which is v naught over 3. And the solution is lambda of t is constant times e to the power ht. Now, before I discuss the scalar field action, okay, let me just make some change of variable. So remember that we had this metric is minus dt square plus lambda t square d tau dx square. Now this change of variable is also used in more general context, but we will be using it for this de Sitter. So we define tau, okay, which is some function of t, such that dt over lambda t is d tau. So the advantage here is that we can now write dt equal to lambda t d tau, okay, and then ds square becomes minus lambda t square times d tau square minus dx square. Okay, and of course this you can now re-express it as a function of tau, okay, by solving this equation. So this tau in general is what is called the conformal time. Because the metric looks conformally equivalent to a flat metric. This is just a flat metric, and then maybe I should have written it slightly differently. Put the minus sign here, put the minus sign here. Okay, so this is a flat Minkowski metric, and then you are just multiplying with by this time dependent factor. So in any case, let's do this here. Okay, so here lambda is already known. So tau, okay, by solving this equation, is, okay, let me write one more step. So d tau is dt over lambda t. Okay, so that's C inverse dt e to the minus ht. And so this tells us that tau is minus C inverse H inverse e to the minus ht. Yeah, of course, you can also always add a constant, but this is a useful choice. And so what we see here is that tau goes to minus infinity as t goes to minus infinity, and it goes to 0 as t goes to infinity. That means that the full time range is contained in the range between minus infinity and 0. Okay, so let me write this here. So the tau ranges between minus infinity and 0. And then let me write the de Sitter, the metric. Okay, so ds square is 1 over h square tau square times minus d tau square plus dx square. Okay, so this you can easily check. Let's go back here. See, here you had a lambda t square, right? Lambda t square is c square e to the 2ht. And that's, if you look at this definition of tau, right? Tau times h is c inverse times e to the minus ht. So lambda t square is 1 over tau square h square. So that's what I've written here. So this is that. So this is the same metric, okay, but written in this tau coordinate system, okay, which will be useful for us. Okay, and we'll be using this tau to carry out our analysis. Okay, other questions? So now first we see that since v of phi is constant, is v naught, phi of xt can be anything, right? Let's call this phi bar, can take any value. Okay, this depends on where you are choosing the origin of your scalar field. So let's say some phi bar. Okay, the final result will be independent of this. So we define our phi tilde, okay, as phi minus phi bar. That's the difference, and then the action can be written as half integral d4x square root of minus determinant g minus half g mu nu del mu phi tilde del mu phi tilde. Okay, so basically the point is phi tilde is phi minus phi bar. We are taking phi bar to be very constant, and so yeah, I just replace it by del mu phi tilde del mu phi tilde. Now we are going to write this explicitly in this coordinate system, and we will be, because this is general coordinate invariant, right? You can use any coordinate system to write this, and you are going to use this tau x coordinate system. So this becomes half integral d tau d cube x square root of minus determinant g. Okay, from here we will give a factor of 1 over h to the 4 tau to the 4. Okay, because determinant g will be 1 over h to the 8 tau to the 8, and then you are taking square root. G mu nu, okay, because it's the inverse, okay, you will get a factor of h square tau square. And then you have the standard form of the action. Is this clear? So the Lagrangian will be half integral d cube x h to the minus 2 tau to the minus 2 del tau phi tilde square minus grad phi tilde square. I'll write this again in the next slide. Are there questions on this?
There is also a constant V naught piece.
Yeah, but that we are now ignoring because we are going to quantize phi tilde. So when you quantize a metric degrees of freedom, then that constant will be important, right? But here that's just a constant added to the Lagrangian, right?
Okay.
So that's why you are not including it. But of course, as I said, when you include the metric, then you have to worry, right? Because the metric is sensitive to that constant. Any other question? So L is half integral d cube x and then h to the minus 2 tau to the minus 2 del tau phi tilde square minus grad phi tilde square. Now, one observation you can make at this stage is, you see, normally the action has this 1 over h bar. Okay. Here, the action is multiplied by this factor of 1 over h square tau square. So this is saying that h square tau square is somehow playing the role of h bar. So in particular, as tau goes to 0, that, if you remember, is a far future. Okay, because tau goes to 0 corresponds to t goes to infinity. as tau goes to 0, the theory should become classical. Now tau we had earlier identified as lambda inverse H inverse. So what this is saying is that when this quantity goes to 0, okay, remember that plot over here, right? Lambda inverse H inverse is here. So if, when this goes to 0, then basically nothing can get affected, no scale, okay, will get affected by quantum fluctuations. And this is at least consistent with what you are observing here, is that when this quantity is small, then the theory becomes classical, okay, as if these will just evolve by classical physics. And we will see explicit illustration of this when we actually do some calculation, okay, of the fluctuations. But this is just intuitively we can see that why, as tau goes to 0, okay, that's when the lambda inverse H inverse goes to 0, the theory starts becoming like classical. Is this point clear? So we can also make it more explicit, that if we define the conjugate momentum, let me call this pi tilde x tau, which is the functional derivative of delta L over delta of phi tilde x tau. So this is h to the minus 2 tau to the minus 2 delta of phi tilde x tau. Okay. Now, the non-zero commutator, okay, is between phi tilde and phi tilde, right? The phi tilde x tau, phi tilde y tau equal time. This is I delta cube x minus y. Okay, this is the commutator that will impose. But now you see that when you actually translate this to the commutator between the things involving phi tilde and its time derivative, what you see is that the phi tilde x tau delta of phi tilde y tau, this commutator becomes I times h square tau square delta cube x minus y. So this goes to 0 as tau goes to 0. Okay, so that means in the far future, we should be able to calculate phi tilde and delta phi tilde with arbitrary accuracy simultaneously. Okay. And that in turn means that if we can calculate this, okay, if we can measure this to arbitrary accuracy, then the subsequent evolution should be like classical evolution of these fields. So this 2-point function, for example, right, that we saw. Well, I have not written it here. Okay, 2-point function of phi tildes. Okay, so phi tilde x tau, phi tilde y tau. Okay. They will evolve, okay, as tau goes to infinity. Sorry, tau goes to 0, as if they are just products of 1-point functions, just product of expectation values, okay, and they evolve classically. And the role of quantum mechanics, as you'll see, will be to set the initial condition. Okay, because this is true only at very late time. Okay, but in early time, of course, this is non-zero. Okay, so let me then proceed. So okay, let me write down the Lagrangian again. So Lagrangian is integral d cube x 1 over h square tau square of delta phi tilde square minus grad phi tilde square. We can go to Fourier transform, okay, but let's just do it after one more step. Okay. So you see that because of this 1 over h tau factor, this is not a standard Lagrangian that we are used to quantizing. So we'll try to change this, okay, get rid of this. Okay, so we define chi tilde x tau as h tau times phi tilde x tau. Okay, and write the Lagrangian in terms of this chi tilde variables. So with this, the Lagrangian becomes half integral d cube x. Okay, this I'll leave as an exercise to check. Let me get this right. We'll get del tau chi tilde plus 1 over tau chi tilde square minus grad of chi tilde square. Okay, so here phi tilde wants to make this, sorry, this should be h tau inverse. So phi tilde is h tau times chi tilde. Maybe this, no, this is, I think, okay. So you substitute phi tilde equal to h tau times chi tilde. Then you calculate del tau phi tilde. Okay, they will get two terms. Okay, del tau phi tilde will be del tau times h tau chi tilde, right? So this will give you h tau times del tau chi tilde, okay, plus there is a derivative will can act also on this tau, okay, and that we can write as 1 over tau times chi tilde, okay, because that's like h times chi tilde. Okay, by substituting this, we'll get this. So you see that here at least we have managed to write this Lagrangian, okay, in a somewhat more standard form, in the sense del tau chi tilde square comes with its standard normalization. But we have to worry about this 1 over tau chi tilde. Okay, so it's not a completely the kind of field theory that you have used, that you have quantized. Okay, but we will see that it's still quadratic and it can be quantized reasonably easily.
So,
Yes, go ahead, please.
Just have a good description of time to, I mean, say that, I mean, the field is getting classical, because, I mean, as tau is approaching 0,
Yes.
even a small period of tau corresponds to a very large period of time. Because,
Yes.
so eventually, if we are relating, I mean, delta phi with phi, I mean, if we are seeing the correlation,
Yes.
then it means that we are sort of finding the correlation between two fields at very large separation of time.
Okay. Yes.
And that should eventually go to 0, because field at very large separation of time should have zero correlation, right?
Yeah. So of course, ultimately, it's coming from there. Okay. Because otherwise, this is a uniform space, right? I mean, there is a time translation symmetry. I mean, even though it doesn't look like there is a time translation symmetry, right? In the de Sitter space indeed has a time translation symmetry. Okay, you just scale t tau, okay, and you get an overall factor in the metric. Okay. So from that point of view, you are right that the reason that this is happening is because of the stretching, right? Because of the stretching of time. But nevertheless, we will see that this is a useful quantity if we want to extrapolate. Okay, that imagine that you want to calculate this for in the far future, okay? And we will see that this is a useful insight that you get, okay? Because indeed, we'll see that in the far future, the way the correlation functions evolve, okay, is exactly as classical. Okay? We'll use tau coordinate. Okay? Because ultimately, if you are interested in the tau goes to 0 limit, right? It doesn't matter whether you use t coordinate or tau coordinate, right? Because we want to get to that value. And we'll see that that value approaches a constant, okay, as tau goes to 0, which means that if you are worked in terms of t, it would have also approached a constant as t goes to infinity. And that will correspond to classical evolution. So that the fact that this 2-point function will go to a constant, okay, will be a signal that it behaves classically. But physically, you are right that it's the reason that it's happening is because of this stretching, because small intervals of tau corresponds to large interval in t.
Okay. Yeah.
Any other question? Okay, so now one thing we can see here is that if you want to construct the Hamiltonian, okay, we can construct this. I'll not explicitly write it down, okay, by using standard definition that this is pi times, you can define the conjugate momentum to chi tilde from here, okay, that's like you read for phi, and then it's like pi times delta of chi tilde minus the Lagrangian itself, okay. So the Hamiltonian is tau dependent. Okay. And in this coordinate system, okay, it approaches free Hamiltonian, the usual Hamiltonian, the usual free field Hamiltonian, as tau goes to minus infinity. Right? Because as tau goes to minus infinity, this 1 over tau terms drop out. Okay, and it becomes just delta chi tilde square minus grad chi square. That's the standard Hamiltonian in Lagrangian in flat space-time, flat Minkowski space-time. And so the Hamiltonian will be the standard Hamiltonian, which is tau independent. So this is something that we should keep in mind, but we'll make use of this later. Okay, so now what we are going to do is to convert this to momentum space, okay, to the Fourier transform. So you define chi hat exactly as we did for phi, any variable we saw how to do Fourier transform. So we use the same notation. So in momentum space, L will be given by half integral d cube x. Here you have del tau chi hat minus k tau plus 1 over tau chi hat minus k tau. Sorry, this is d cube k now. D cube k, and I think there's a 2 pi q also, the way I've set up the Fourier transform. So times del tau chi hat k tau plus 1 over tau chi hat k tau minus, okay, that grad chi square, that become k square times chi hat minus k tau chi hat k tau. Okay, so in the position space it decouples, okay, as usual. Okay. So I'll use a shorthand notation for k square. So k square I'll call omega k square, okay, and often I'll drop this k. Okay, so I'll just refer to this omega square, but it's understood that omega square is mod k square. Okay, so now we want to quantize this. Okay, now you want to treat, so far you have just done classical manipulation, now you want to quantize this. So normally the way, if you remember the way we quantized it, we decompose this in the plane wave background, plane wave basis. And then we define the corresponding coefficients and A dagger and A. Okay, the basis that we chose was time independent. Right? We just took the into the ik dot x basis. Okay. We expanded in wrote it as A and A star first, right, as classical. Then we took the A star into A dagger, made the A star into A dagger by thinking of them as quantum operators. And then we calculate the commutator between A and A dagger using the known commutator between chi and pi chi. Okay, or you can use also the commutator between phi and pi phi. It doesn't matter which one you use, it's all the same. The only difference that here will be that because the Hamiltonian is time dependent, it's more convenient to include all the time dependence in the choice of basis. So let me then see what we'll do. So we'll find analog of the plane wave solution, including time dependence. That includes time dependence. Then we expand chi hat k tau in this basis. And then the coefficients will be tau independent classically. So classical equation okay, this is by construction, right? Because the basis states have been chosen to have the time dependence so that they actually solve the equations, right? So the coefficients will be time independent. And then we make them into quantum operators. And find that commutation relation. Okay, so let's start by doing that. So your first task is to find analog of the plane wave solution. So the equation of motion for chi hat k tau. You could also get the equation from in the position space and then convert it to momentum space, but it doesn't matter. It's given by minus del tau plus 1 over tau times del tau plus 1 over tau. This whole thing this acts on the whole thing. Chi hat k tau minus omega square chi hat k tau equal to 0. Okay, this follows easily from the variational principle. Okay, you can either use a Lagrangian, okay, Euler-Lagrange equation from here, or if you go back and write in terms of the action, I think I didn't write that. Yeah, you can think in terms of the action, and then just vary this action, either written in terms of phi tilde or chi tilde. Then I think I did write well. Then you will find that you get back this minus del tau because you have to do an integration by parts, and this is the equation. Okay, this is the value exercise. So for a given k, this is a second order differential equation, right? So it should have two independent solutions. Okay. And again, I'll leave as an exercise to check that the solutions okay, finding the solution is a little more difficult, but once I give the solution, of course, you can easily check. Okay. The one solution is v k tau, okay, which I'll take to be 1 over square root of 2 omega k. Okay, these normalization factors are, maybe I just drop the k. Okay, omega is mod k, okay, by definition. 2 pi to the 3 by 2 e to the minus I omega tau, and then 1 plus 1 over I omega tau. Okay, so this is one solution. And the other solution is V, that's complex conjugation. V k tau star is the other solution. And also you note that V minus k tau is the same as V k tau. Right? The way I have set it up, the V minus k tau is the same as V k tau because omega is an even function of k. Right? Omega is a small k. So then the idea is that we will write, and the normalization I have chosen such that maybe I can write this down. This normalization I have chosen such that V k tau, we also exercise del tau V k tau star minus del tau of V k tau V k tau star. This is 2 pi cube times I. Okay, if you remember the basis states for free scalar field theory also had a satisfied a relation similar to this. So the idea is that we will now write chi, okay, in terms of this. Okay, so let me write this. So we'll write chi k tau as ak times v k tau plus ak dagger, this is a minus k dagger, v k tau star. So I'll explain this. In general, this could be two arbitrary coefficients, right? Because it's you have a second order differential equation, so the solution is an arbitrary linear combination of v and v star. But this I have fixed this to a minus k dagger, okay, because we want to impose the condition. So this is chi hat, right? Chi hat is a Fourier transform of chi tilde. I have been talking about chi hat, yeah. So we have this relation in the X space that chi tilde X tau star should be chi tilde X tau because it's a real field. Okay, I have taken this to be real scalar. So this in momentum space translates to chi tilde k tau star, sorry, chi hat k tau star is equal to chi hat minus k tau. And this coefficient has been chosen to, right now let me put star. Okay, let's see, we are not quantizing yet. Okay, this coefficient has been chosen so that this condition is satisfied. You can see if you take the star, this becomes ak star times v k tau star, but v k tau star is v minus, sorry, v k tau star we worked out. Yeah, so v k tau star is the other solution. Okay, so v k tau is minus v k tau. So v k tau star is v minus k tau star. So this becomes ak star times v minus k tau star. And similarly for this, and you can easily verify that once I've chosen this a minus, this coefficient to be a minus k star. So exercise, check that first line satisfies this condition over here. Satisfy this condition. Okay, that's the reason I have chosen this to be a minus k star. And the other point is that I have not included any time dependence here because these already satisfy the full time dependent equation. So you know that even if you put time dependence, once you substitute in the equations of motion, okay, the equations of motion will make this time independent. Okay, that's why I have not included any time dependence here. So now we go to quantum theory. So in quantum theory, we are going to treat these as operators. So I'll write chi hat of k tau as ak times v k tau plus a minus k dagger v k tau star. This here I can put star. So this is just normal function. Okay. And I can also calculate del tau chi hat k tau from here. That's ak vk tau, del tau of vk tau. You see that vk tau, if you look at the time dependence, okay, there is a explicit time dependence is given, so you can calculate this. But let me just write this as keep this as del tau of vk tau. Plus a minus k dagger del tau of k tau star. Is this clear so far? So now use the commutation relation involving, we can either start with phi and phi tilde, sorry, phi tilde and pi tilde, and then write phi tilde and pi tilde are known in terms of phi chi tilde and pi chi tilde. Okay, so you can translate from there. So this was pi tilde was what, h square tau square, h to the minus 2 tau to the minus 2 delta phi tilde, right? So these you can now re-express in terms of chi tilde and del tau chi tilde, okay, and hence chi hat and del tau chi hat, and you can work out, okay, that what it implies for the commutation relation between a and a dagger. So this is the procedure we are going to use. Okay. And I'll now write down the result. Okay, but the algebra is more or less straightforward. Okay. All you have to do is that you have to start with the commutation relation that you know. Okay. Between phi tilde and pi tilde, convert it into commutation relation between pi tilde and pi chi tilde, okay, the conjugate momentum to chi tilde, or between chi tilde and del tau chi tilde, and then translate it to the commutation relation between chi hat and del tau chi hat, okay, by Fourier transform. So let me write down the final result. This is an exercise, okay, reasonably straightforward algebra. Check that. This gives all equal time, of course, a k prime tau. This is 0. Similarly, a k tau dagger, a k prime tau dagger, that's also 0. And then a k tau, a k prime tau dagger. Okay, the way I have normalized it, I think it's just delta q of a k minus k prime. Okay, it's a more sophisticated normalization. You could have included the square root of 2 omega factors, etc., to make it Lorentz covariant, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, because the whole theory doesn't have Lorentz invariance anyway. So this is like free field. Okay, so even though we started by writing down, we started with a field which is not exactly the free field because there is a time dependent background. After you have done all these manipulations, okay, in terms of A and A dagger, the commutation relations are exactly like that of a free field. It requires some effort to check, but it's, as I said, it's straightforward. And in fact, once I've given you this, it's even easier, okay, because all you now have to do is use these commutation relations, okay, to and use a relation between chi hat and del tau chi hat, okay, to first calculate the commutation relation between chi hat and del tau chi hat, etc. Then we convert it this to position space between chi tilde and del tau chi tilde, etc. by taking Fourier transform, and then convert into phi tilde and pi tilde, okay, which are again given in terms of phi and this derivative, time derivative. Okay. So it's a straightforward exercise, but you should do this. Okay. Other questions?
Sir, they are not free field operators in the sense that we can write Hamiltonian as a something like A dagger or
No, because Hamiltonian is time dependent, right?
and that time dependence is somewhat. Is it an indication that some of the energy we are losing to gravity?
Yeah, in a sense, yes, because it's an expanding universe which is making it time dependent, right? Because the background is expanding, right? And indeed, it is because some of the energy you are losing to gravity, right? If you have a free field, free scalar field, for example, right, its energy density gets diluted, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we are seeing here.
Yeah.
Any other question? Okay, so now, given this, okay, up to this point, it's nice, okay, but now you have to choose the definition of a vacuum. Now, in normal quantum field theory, in Minkowski spacetime, the vacuum is defined to be the lowest energy state of the Hamiltonian. The Hamiltonian. But here H is time dependent. So then what is the vacuum? The definition of the vacuum becomes time dependent because it's the lowest energy state of the Hamiltonian, but Hamiltonian at what value of time? So this makes the definition of vacuum time dependent. Now, what is normally done in these calculations, although it's not the only choice, that we define the vacuum as the lowest energy state of H as tau goes to minus infinity. Okay, that's in the far past. Now, if you remember the form of the Lagrangian, here, you can see that as tau goes to minus infinity in the far past, these terms drop out. And the Lagrangian looks like that of a free scalar field. So in this limit, the Hamiltonian indeed becomes sum over or integral d cube k. And then omega, which is mod k. And so if we define this to be H on the vacuum equal to 0, this corresponds to AK on the vacuum equal to 0 for every K. So this vacuum, this particular choice is what is called the Bunch-Davies vacuum. And it's generally assumed that the universe is in this vacuum. Okay, the quantum state of the universe corresponds to Bunch-Davies vacuum, which means in the far past you take the Hamiltonian and it's put it in its ground state. That's the state of the universe in the far past. And this makes sense because in this coordinate system, you see that it does go to a finite value as tau goes to minus infinity. Okay, so this H actually goes to a finite limit in this as you take tau goes to minus infinity. But I should just add that other choices of vacuum are possible. Other choices are possible. Okay, which are sometimes called the alpha vacuum. And the idea is that we can, instead of using A and AK, A dagger, right? We can define, say, different quantity A tilde K as P times AK plus Q times A minus K dagger, and A tilde K dagger as the Hermitian conjugate. So that's Q times A minus K plus P times AK dagger. Okay. And you can adjust P and Q, okay, so that the commutation relation between the A tilde and A tilde dagger takes exactly the same form as the commutation between A and A dagger that we wrote down. Okay, there is in fact a one parameter family, okay, and that's what is called this alpha family. Okay, so this gives one parameter family of choices of A and A tilde and A tilde dagger. It gives you one parameter family. Okay, which I can define, say, A tilde K alpha and A tilde K alpha dagger. And then the alpha vacuum, that A tilde K alpha on the alpha vacuum equal to 0 for all K. Okay, and typically it will give somewhat different result if you choose to work in the alpha vacuum. So you'll be working in Bunch-Davies vacuum, but it will be useful to remember that this choice exists.
So would you show the definition of AK alpha?
Yeah. So basically what you do is that you take A tilde and A tilde dagger as linear combinations of these. Okay, these are like Bogoliubov transformation. Okay, it's a linear combination of the creation and annihilation operators. And then you have to adjust P and Q. These are not independent parameters. We got to adjust P and Q so that the commutation relations between A tilde and A tilde dagger follow the same pattern as between A and A dagger. Once you do that, okay, then instead of having two parameters, you are left with one parameter. And that's the A tilde K alpha.
Okay, but it might not be it is a linear combination.
Yeah, we normally take this in defining alpha vacuum. We take linear combination because you're working at a quadratic action, right? So you want to maintain everything quadratic, so you take these linear combinations. Okay, otherwise in free theory you look interacting, right? If you try to make a nonlinear transformations over here. So the Hamiltonian written in terms of these will still be quadratic, right? Whereas if you make a nonlinear transformation, it will not remain quadratic.
Okay.
So is there a reason to use the first vacuum that you written?
Reason to use?
I mean, the first vacuum, this Bunch-Davies.
Bunch-Davies. Not really. I mean, it's just thought that it's more natural. Right, but as I said, I mean, many people are worried about this, that whether this is the right thing to use. But we just, because, I mean, after all, you have to, if you want to study something about the universe, you have to make a postulate about what is the quantum state of the universe. Right, and one says that the quantum state of the universe is such that it goes to the ground state of the Hamiltonian in the far past.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So now I'll leave it as an exercise. That since phi hat is known in terms of chi hat, which is known in terms of A and A dagger, so the tau dependence in A, AK, A minus K dagger, we can now calculate the two-point function. Okay, again we do this calculation at one point, which this now it's what it means is that it's a vacuum expectation value of this is in the Bunch-Davies vacuum of phi hat k tau, phi hat k prime tau. So the idea is that once you express the phi hats in terms of the A and A dagger, appropriate linear combination, so you can use the fact that A and this is equal to 0. And if there is an A dagger, you try to take it to the left, okay, passing through A and pick up the commutator on the way. So it's a standard calculation that we do in quantum field theory, except that there will be some additional functions that are involved, okay, because of this 1 over tau piece, extra 1 over tau piece. And I'll leave it as an exercise to check that this quantity is given by, I'll write it again, but let me write it once here, to 2 pi cube delta cube k plus k prime. This is the standard momentum conservation. And then we have 1 over 2 omega h square tau square times 1 plus 1 over omega square tau square. Okay, I'll write this formula again in the next slide because you want to learn something from here. But this is what you get by the result of explicit calculation by making these substitutions. Is this okay? Are there questions? Okay, so let me write this again and then make a few comments and then I'll stop for today. So this is the full answer, and you see that this has a complicated time dependence, tau dependence. But now you see that as tau goes to infinity, okay, in particular, if omega square tau square is much larger than 1, then this one goes to a finite value, a fixed value. This goes to 2 pi cube delta cube k plus k prime times h square over 2 omega cube. Now this, sorry, not much less, greater than 1, much less than 1. When this is much less than 1, this is a large number, right? So you can ignore the 1, and then the tau square cancels and we arrive at this result. So this corresponds to late time, right? Because tau goes to 0. But you can also write this as omega to the minus 2, much larger than tau square, which is lambda to the minus 2, h to the minus 2. Okay, or mod k inverse is much larger than lambda inverse h inverse. So we see from here that while the expansion of the universe may gives a time-dependent contribution to this two-point function, when the perturbations go out of the horizon, okay, that's the statement. Okay, in that diagram, okay, that means that when this mod k inverse is larger, is above the curve, okay, the lambda inverse h inverse curve, okay, then this approaches a constant value. Okay. And this you can think of as classical evolution, as if classical evolution. Okay. And indeed, if you classically, right, if you had something like this, phi hat k tau, phi hat k prime tau. Classical evolution from here would be just phi hat classical k tau, phi hat classical k prime tau. So it's as if individually they evolve classically. But of course, the initial condition will have to be set by the quantum fluctuations, because there are quantum fluctuations in the early time. But in this region, it's as if you have just frozen them into classical evolution, because classically, these in fact do not evolve for late time. Okay, this we can verify, because essentially this 1 over tau piece goes away. So this is another manifestation of the of what we had said earlier. Okay, that for mod k inverse larger than lambda inverse h inverse, the perturbations, okay, basically get frozen, and then they can be thought of as just evolving classical. Okay, the result that we get is as if the result of classical evolution. Now in de Sitter space, of course, we can see it explicitly, okay, and during inflation also. But this is a more general statement, okay, that outside the horizon, once the perturbation has exited the horizon, okay, even though it's a quantum correlator, right, you can pretend as if that from then on, okay, it just evolves classically. Okay, and you can use as classical equations of motion to evolve the perturbation, and that's the principle that we're going to follow in the lectures. That we'll not know the precise microscopic details, but what we'll assume is that the subsequent evolution will just follow the classical evolution, okay, independent classical evolution of these two. Okay, and the only relic that they are related, okay, was the fact that the initial condition, okay, is said by what the quantum fluctuations give us at late time. The other point I want to mention is that this in free field theory, in flat space, I think if we use the same notation, you have this 1 over 2 omega. Okay, we get 1 over 2 omega here. Okay, this factor over here is 1 over 2 omega in flat space. So we have basically, we have enhancement by a factor of h square over omega square. Okay, so this is enhancement for low omega. And this is what, this is the reason that this happens because of the de Sitter space. So this is specific to de Sitter. And there are different ways of interpreting it. Okay, so one simple interpretation is that because we started with the Bunch-Davies vacuum, right, where it was in the ground state initially, and then in a time-dependent background, you will typically expect that there will be particle production. Okay. And because of the particle production, the effective two-point function increases. Okay. I mean, this is particle production because of the quantum fluctuations. Okay. So the effective two-point function increases. Okay. And eventually, once the perturbation scale goes out of the horizon, it reaches it just follows classical evolution. So this enhancement you can think of as the result of particle production when the perturbations are inside the horizon. Okay, and then once the perturbation exits the horizon, then there is no further enhancement. Okay, so I think that's where I'll stop. And next time we're going to study in more detail the general perturbations, because this is just a toy model. Okay. We'll see what are the relevant fields that you have to deal with during inflation. Okay, and it will be coupled dynamics of several fields, and we will study the perturbations in those fields. Okay, are there questions?
So should we be worried that the spatial correlation, if we were to write some phi tilde x comma tau and phi tilde y comma tau, they
Yes.
would have diverged, ultraviolet divergence would have come in there?
Yeah, so that we don't worry too much, right? Assuming that there's an ultraviolet cutoff, because you don't go to that smaller distance anyway. Okay. This physics that you are seeing here, okay, is really long distance physics.
Yeah.
Because when you actually try to make connection with cosmology, right, what you see there is a long distance physics. What happens at the time of exit?
Yeah. Also, could you repeat about what you said regarding this being a classical evolution? Maybe in the next class also, that is fine.
Okay, I can do that. Yeah. So basically, what I'm saying is that the fact that this gets frozen, right? The tau dependence stops here. Okay. One way to interpret this would be that if you take that classical phi, okay, phi hat at late time, then classical phi in fact doesn't evolve with time at late time, because the 1 over tau pieces go away. These are the Fourier transform variables, and they just stop being time dependent. And what I said is that you can interpret this, okay, the fact that this has become time independent for large time, okay, as saying that this 2-point function, okay, evolves as if this is just a classical 2-point function, product of the phi's, classical phi's, okay, and each of these evolve classically. Okay, that will produce exactly the same thing, provided of course you set the initial condition to be this. Yeah, that's what I meant, but we can elaborate on this in the next class.
Okay.
Any other question? Okay, so if not, I'll stop here. So tomorrow there is no class, so we'll meet again next week.